but boy, it's nice today to be able to.
Oh, I just got my Facebook post.
Okay, we are streaming live on Facebook. Welcome, everybody. Let's just get this shared. Oops. We can begin. Well, I'm going to mute everybody for the oh, no. Okay, there's some sounds coming. All right. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to mute, if you don't mind. But if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Welcome, everybody. Shavua tov, good tvach. We're getting into the month of Elul, preparing for a new year. And it's time to take stock, right? That's what the month is there for us, a gift. So we add things like blowing the shofar, we add the David, Hashem Oiri, that we say in Shachris Minyan, and we say by Mincha in the afternoon. All things to give us an opportunity to, I guess, to think and to take stock. Now, in what area ultimately is the greatest need that we take stock in? So just to share with something that has bothered me throughout the years. I get this magazine that shows about great philanthropists and their giving. And I'm actually inspired by the great giving today more than ever before. There's more tzedakah, more charity that's being given today than ever before. And that's great. That's phenomenal. By Jews, by non-Jews, it's a phenomenal thing. Now, one of the amazing things is that people have a lot more money today. The rich are much richer. And many of those richer people are actually doing something about it, and they want to give away most of their wealth in their lifetime, not after their lifetime, which is an amazing sentiment. However, when it comes to Jews and their giving, and giving large sums of money, what I see is where they're giving it to is to, not to take away the importance of a university or of a hospital, of a museum and the like, but so little of it is given to Jewish continuity, is given to Yiddishkeit, to given to a Jewish day school, to a yeshiva, to a Chabad house, to a synagogue, relative the amounts of money. Now, you might say there's greater needs. Could be. Maybe. But I don't think that's the issue. I think it really comes down to values. What do we value in life? And on that perspective will determine where we're going to give, the greatest amount of our charitable giving. What is really important to me? So if health is the most important thing to me, that I am healthy, so then I'm going to give to institutions of health. If culture is the most important thing to me in my life, the greatest value that I have, then I'm going to give to a museum or the like. Right? if education, getting ahead, and then people should be able to have a livelihood is the most important thing to me, then perhaps I'm going to give it to university. So it's the values, really, what it boils down to. And that's on a shall we say, on a tzedakah level, on a charitable level. But then there's, of course, on a more personal level, what do I value? Fine, good foods? Do I value the way I am perceived by others? So if I value the way I'm perceived by others, and buying a $400 pair of shoes is, of course, why not? Because it's going to give me, what I want and what I value in life, that I should look good. If I value, having tasty foods, so the $400 pair of shoes, I'm not so interested in, not so important to me. How I look, it's how my taste buds feel, right? And so I'll forego that, and I'll spend it maybe, on some lavish evenings out, whatever the case may be. This is the question. So how do we strengthen Jewish values, values of faith, that would be ultimately translated in people giving their charity in those areas? That's the question of the day. So with that, let's go into our Parsha. Our Parsha has many, many mitzvahs that it deals with. One of the mitzvahs it deals with is weights and scales. It's interesting. It's an old-fashioned way, but it's still being done in some places. What do you have? You have a weight of 16 ounces, 1 pound, right? Piece of metal or whatever it is. And then you put the fruit on the other side. And when they balance out, presto, here's the pound of fruit that you want. And here's the price, right? So the Torah forbids us to do what? Have faulty weights. In other words, if you have a weight, if you're telling people that this is a pound, then really it's only 14 ounces, right? So you're an act of thievery in the fact that you are not giving the full produce that you're claiming to. Yet it's a separate prohibition in the Torah, even though it's an act of theft. It's a separate prohibition in the Torah, special mitzvah that you can't have. Now, not only you can't have, but you can't even have those weights, even if you don't use them. They tell the guy of the baker used to get his butter from a butter manufacturer, and then one day he recognizes, after several days, he recognizes that it seems like I'm getting less butter all the time. So he approaches the guy, says, "I'm taking you to the rabbi. We're going to go to the rabbinical court. I don't believe that you're giving me the 3 pounds of butter that I ask of you every day." Takes him to court, to the rabbis. So the rabbi asks the guy who company of the butter. He says, "What are you doing? How are you measuring it out to him? Are your weights appropriate weights?" "I'll tell you the truth, sir, the rabbi. I don't use weights. You see, I have a standing order of 3 pounds of bread from the baker. So every day when he brings me his bread, I put it on one side of the scale, and then I give him the equal amount of butter on the other side of the scale. In French, we say, "Do is the Hund begraben." Here, translate, it's actually Yiddish, the dog is buried. I don't know what that means, how that Yiddish saying comes, but of course he got discovered, the baker. All right, let us go to here we are. Everybody see the split screen? Let us go into the reading of this mitzvah. You shall not keep in your pouch two different weights, one large and one small. You shall not keep in your house two different ephah measures, one large and one small. Rather, you shall have a full and honest weight and a full and honest ephah measure, in order that your days will be prolonged on the land which the Lord your God gives you. For whoever does these things, whoever perpetrates such injustice, is an abomination to the Lord your God. So that is this mitzvah, not to have two different types of weights. We'll get into that. What is the two different types of weights later on? Then the portion continues with the end of the Parsha. What is the end of the Parsha? Comes and tells us the following. You shall remember that Amalek did to you on the way when you went out of Egypt, how he happened upon you on the way and cut off all of the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear. Therefore, it will be when the Lord your God grants you respite from all your enemies around you in the land, which the Lord your God gives to you as an inheritance to possess, you shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens. You shall not forget. So we have two completely different stories that go on that seem to be totally disconnected, one from the other. But as we know, everything in the Torah is connected. The fact that one's narrative follows the other, there has to be some kind of connection. What is that connection? So Rashi is bothered by this, right? What is the connection between the two? And he says, you shall remember what Amalek did to you. The juxtaposition of these passages teaches us that if you use fraudulent measures and weights, you should be worried about provocation from the enemy. As the verse states, deceitful scales are an abomination of God. After which the next verse continues, when a willful wickedness comes, then comes disgrace. So Rashi posits that the second passage comes as a consequence of the first, when the Jewish people will fail to observe honest business practices, right? Specifically when it comes to false weights, that will make them vulnerable to their enemies. Now, the question is, why is this? What is the natural consequence between the two? Why should one lead to the other? Now, we understand that if you do something wrong, so therefore there's a consequence. But why specifically an enemy? And why specifically the enemy of Amalek? How is that an appropriate punishment? Especially when we speak about Amalek. Who's Amalek? Who's Amalek? Amalek is one of the only nations, one other nation, that when Mashiach comes, that nation will not partake in the Messianic redemption. When Mashiach comes, it's not just a redemption for the Jewish people, it's a redemption for the entire world, including non-Jews, including non-Jewish nations. Not Amalek. And in other words, Amalek is such a evil people that they will disappear from the world. Now, we don't know exactly who Amalek is right now, right? But that's not the point. The point is that if there's such an evil nation that need to be obliterated and destroyed, how come that if you use false weights, it's such a severe punishment that you're going to be attacked by none other than the evil nation of Amalek? How do we understand that? Question clear? Yeah? Thumbs up? Wonderful. All right. You just see online over here. There's a thumbs up over here. All right. Excellent. All right. So we need to understand the connection between dishonest scales and the arrival of Amalek. So first, let's understand the gravity of this sin, of the scales. So the Kli Yakar, who is a 16th century sage, so he quotes from King Solomon, diverse weights and diverse measures, even both are an abomination to God. And what does it mean, diverse weights? Can be read as one weight. Diverse measures is a second weight. So there's a multiple fraudulent weights over here. What does that mean exactly? How do we understand that? So the Kli Yakar explains. The explanation of the matter lies in the words of King Solomon. Diverse weights and diverse measures, even both are an abomination of God. If they are both false, why does it need to state that they are both an abomination? Obviously, if they're both false, well, they're an abomination. Why would anyone make a distinction between them? And what does it even mean, both? They're both the same. They're false. What's the difference? If they're false by this amount or that amount, it's false. It's all the same. Rather, he must be speaking of someone holding on to one false weight and another true weight. What does he do? He goes and weighs for some people using his smaller deficient weight, and for some people using the larger regular weight. Thus, if people go to the courthouse accusing him of underweighting, he can claim to the court, but I have sold to many people. Ask them whether their goods were weighed correctly, and they will attest that nothing was missing. Oops, what I have over here, sorry. Nothing is missing. Sorry. Then, when the court sends for his weights, he will send the proper one. So, it emerges that if not for the proper weight, he would not be able to sell anyone with the smaller one. This is why he maintains the proper one, to present falsehood as a truth. This is why even the proper weight is an abomination. And therefore it says, doing all of these things is an abomination to God, referring to weighing with a proper weight as well, for it too is an abomination, since he only weighs with it in order to fool the world. It was of this that Solomon said, both are an abomination, to include the proper weight as well. This explains the juxtaposition of these laws to the commandment to remember Amalek did to you. For it is difficult to understand that an enemy attack has to do with weights. Did Amalek come and attack the Israelites because they were using false weights? Rather, that larger proper weights are referred to the deceitful scales when one uses them in order to deceive, as explained above. One who uses them to weigh conceals his wickedness from the public eye and pretends that the heavenly eye cannot see. This is the way the Holy One, blessed be he tells these cheaters. You have stolen and cheated in secret? The Holy One, blessed be he, will send your enemy to take all that you have in the open. In other words, it's your just desert. So, what is a Kliyakra saying? That this person has an elaborate deception. It's not like regular theft. Not like regular theft. Because here, if he was regular theft, that means it would be consistently just using the smaller weight, the false weight, consistently to steal from people. No. He's got an elaborate plan over here. He's got it all worked out. He wants to be more deceptive. A thief is not necessarily deceptive. A thief is just a thief. But here there's great deception involved in order that should not be caught or should not be perceived as a thief. Therefore, he has a regular weight that he uses whatever amount of time in order that people should perceive him to be an honest individual. Then when he uses the deceptive weight, he can always claim, but look, many people, they know that I'm honest. And even when he's called to court, or when the court will come down and check his weights, he'll show them the honest weight. So this is then a more deceptive form of evil. And therefore, God says, well, the Amalekis, they were in your face. They openly despised you. This is what your just reward is, or desert, or your punishment. When it comes to anti-Semitism, there's two types of anti-Semitism. There's the kind that the Jews had in Russia that was in your face. The hatred was clear. But then you have the Western Europeans. They also hated, but it wasn't in your face. Which one do you like better? The one that you know? The one that's clear to you? Or the one that's deceptive? Here in Canada, we can have the same. People speak about, anti-Semitism here in Quebec, in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. It was in your face. While in other parts of Canada, it wasn't. Different between the French Canadian and the non-French Canadian, the English. A lot more deceptive. They were very nice to your face, but could backstab you. What kind of anti-Semitism do you like better? So the Torah is telling us over here, when it comes to the deceitfulness, since you do it in such a deceptive manner, the consequence will be that it's going to be in your face, like Amalek is there, the anti-Semite who's in your face, that will be bringing your punishment, your just desert. Any questions? Is that clear? Yeah? Okay. Let's take this a step further. Let's flesh this out. The Netziv, commentator from the 19th century, he brings this out in a further demonstration. We know that in Torah there are 3 cardinal sins that a person has to be ready to give up their lives for. What are they? Murder, idolatry, and adultery. Those are the 3. Now, what is it about them? So let's go over here to the Netziv. He explains the following. Our sages have taught that the most severe sins are those of lasciviousness, idolatry, and murder. The severity of these three, however, is not connected to their punishment. After all, the punishment for desecrating the Shabbos is more severe than the punishment of sexual crimes. Rather, they are considered cardinal sins because one who sins will sin in one of these three basic ways: out of lack of faith in God and his Torah, out of inordinate desire or an inordinate anger, or another character trait relevant to social interaction. The archetype of the lack of faith is idolatry. The archetype of illicit desire is lasciviousness. And the archetype of negative character traits is murder. Every sin comes in one of these three forms. Desecration of Shabbos for the sake of one's livelihood is a matter of faith, and thus is a shade of idolatry. If one does it so for the pure personal benefit, then it is an offshoot of lasciviousness. Now, the worst of these sins is idolatry, since it concerns faith, and the possibility for repentance is remote, as those who go do not return. So, three cardinal sins, therefore considered such because so much else comes from what they represent: faithlessness, bad character, and lust. So, what have we seen about the sin of the scales? Above all, what is it? Faithlessness, right? The absence of faith. That God, first of all, sees and knows exactly what you're doing. Because if God knows and sees what you're doing, and you really believe that, well, then you won't have false weights. Furthermore, not only that he sees, but maybe he sees, but ich darf machen a Leben. A Jew has to make a livelihood. And how am I going to make a livelihood if I'm not going to be deceitful? Meaning, I don't trust that my livelihood is coming from God. And the blessing comes from him. Therefore, I have the need to be deceitful, dishonest. So now let's see how the Netziv ties back to our passage, the connection between Amalek and the sin of scales. So we continue in his teachings over here. Remember that which Amalek did to you. By placing this next to the previous subject, it is apparent that Amalek comes to account on account of the sin of the weights. This is mystifying, since in the desert there was little opportunity for merchandise for which they would need measurements or weights. However, this matter can be understood by contemplating why our sages have so deplored the sin of weights, to the extent that they have said that the sin of the weights is greater than that of lasciviousness. Why should it be more severe than any other kind of thievery? Now, when one steals some precious object from another, it might be a result of his desire for that object, in which case it falls in the category of lasciviousness. However, one who makes false weights does not generally do so out of desire, but out of a lack of faith in God, who through divine providence nourishes and sustains every creature in accordance with its deeds. Therefore, this sin is in the category of idolatry. Therefore, they have said that the sin of the scales, although it is only an offshoot of idolatry and is yet far from the chief sin of apostasy, nevertheless, it is more severe than lasciviousness, the chief sin of immodest desire, because a lack of faith is hard to repent from, and it impinges on the honor of God's name. With this, we can return to the Torah portion of Amalek, which is introduced by the words, "Is God in our midst or not?" And then Amalek came. This is in itself curious. After witnessing so many miracles, how did doubt ever enter their hearts? However, as we have explained previously, they doubted whether God would remain in their midst after the passing of Moses, within the natural order. And once there was no more miracles, it was on account of the deficient faith that Amalek came. That is because of the sin of the scales. It's an interesting analysis over here of the Nitziv. Right? What is he saying? There's this a distinction to be made between scales and other kinds of theft. Right? The theft is something more of the heart. I want this. I'm going to get it. You know, when I was a kid, a very small kid, I don't know, I was 7 years old. Someone, was older than me, took me into a store. I said, wow, that belt, I really want it. You know what the person did? They put it on and walked out with it. I was like, my gosh, how can a person do such a thing? 7 years old, 8 years old, I don't remember exactly. Like, what kind of, I remember an older person looking up to this individual and, acting in such a way. And what was it? It was there. It caught their fancy. They wanted it. So they stole it. Simple, right? It's something of the heart. But when it comes to the scales, it's something of the head. It's not just out of lust and greed, right? Now, of course, that's inexcusable, lust and greed, and therefore you steal. Well, I'm not trying to excuse it at all, obviously. But the scales is different because it's far from a crime of just passion. It's calculated. It's devious. And that's what makes it uniquely different. Therefore, since it's a planned out, executed crime, the sin, it's like a sin of principle. I've got it worked out. How am I going to do this? Therefore, since it's so calculated, it becomes something that to return to God is much more difficult. In this instance, when I pointed out to this individual, how could you do that? It didn't make sense to me. Person initially laughed it off, and later on, felt a little misgivings. Why? Because it was only caught in the moment. Saw the belt, so I like that. Wasn't ready to buy it, but the greed and the lust caught in the moment. Since it's something that isn't filtered through and through the mind and everything of the individual, you can repent for that. And the person, afterwards realized and, kind of felt bad. Didn't want to own up to it to a 7-year-old, but, you could see that they felt bad, right? But here with the faulty weights, it's a much more corruption of the individual, because all of the planning that it goes into it, and therefore the disproportionate severe consequence is not disproportionate because of all of the effect that it has on the individual, because of the increased engagement in order to do something so deceptive. So therefore, Amalek is a poetic justice. Is that clear? So now the question, of course, is how do we deal with this? How do we adequately combat this? That becomes the real question. The Maggid of Mezrich, who is the Alter Rebbe's teacher, successor of the Baal Shem Tov, Hasidic movement, so he says there's two ways you can deal with a thief. One is you can scream, scare them off, tell them how terrible they are and how terrible of a sin it is. which is the way of Musar, or you could speak to the person and try to draw them in and to change their value system, that in changing what they deem valuable in their lives, then therefore that will hopefully change the way they behave. So let us understand then Amalek and false weights in a much more profound, deeper manner, as based on Hasidic teachings, that will give us a greater insight of the parallel between them, and more importantly, the remedy. Because the Torah, till now, what we're speaking about is how the grave sin of being deceptive, having these faulty weights. But of course, that's not the ultimate goal of the Torah, is to tell us how bad we can, the bad things that we can do. But it's to help us see the flip side on how we can combat anything that potentially that we could do that's being deceptive. So with that, let us understand Amalek in different terms. The numerical value of the word Amalek is that of the word of doubt, suffix. That is, Amalek casts doubt on one's faith in God and in the sanctity of the Torah. So rather than rely on a frontal attack, what does Amalek do? They seek out the weakness of the people, an opportunity where to infiltrate, and there they pounce upon. That's what they did, right? Those who are lacking, as the verse says, lagging behind. They got the ones trailing from behind. It wasn't a frontal attack that they made with the Jewish people. So instead of presenting themselves in an outright manner, they're doing it in a devious way. So this represents our negativity, our animal soul, our Yetzer Hara, evil inclination. It doesn't come out and say, deny outright God. It's not going to come to us in such a manner. It's going to come to us in a devious way, in a subtle cynicism, casting doubts, poking holes in faith. Are you really sure about that? Do you really need to do that mitzvah? Do you really have to pray with the minyan? Right? Is it really so important, that particular deed that you want to do? Right. In other words, it's not a frontal attack. It's, coming from the backside. Therefore, to counter Amalek, we have to be equally subtle, wise, and deal with any cracks there might be in ourselves that could allow this to seep in. So where does it all start? By this subtle influence, and that could be the slippery slope. So the answer is that these gray areas, or these subtle things that aren't quite wrong, they might be gray areas. So it's not rejecting Judaism. It's just, chill out, relax. We have to be so passionate about it. Yeah. So in these areas where there can be a gradual procession downwards is where we have to be aware. Let's see what that means. The Rebbe is going to explain it in the concept of weights. What do we weigh? What do we give weight to? Let's understand. The Jewish people are, after all, children of the Lord your God, and God's people are a part of Him. How then is it possible that the evil inclination to conceive a Jew to commit a sin? The answer to this is the sin of the scales. The evil inclination does not initially approach a Jew with the intention of having him rebel against the Holy One, blessed be he. Rather, he starts by telling him one thing today and then telling him something worse the next day. He tries to depreciate his weight. The point is this: the evil inclination is able to impact a Jew when he has one weight and another weight, one eighth of measure and another measure, one large and one small. That is when he maintains two different kinds of yardsticks and measures, one for measuring material needs and another for spiritual needs. Were the Jew able to affect the change within so that he does not have two different measures and weights, his service of God would not be weakened, leaving the evil inclination without any chance of influencing him to indulge in inappropriate luxuries, even if they are technically permitted, and certainly not in any prohibited activity. So, what do we have over here? So there's what the Rebbe is saying is like this: what are we valuing? If we have two weights and they're different from each other, that begins the problem on how we're giving weight to the values in our lives. So, for example, when it comes to education, when it comes to Jewish education, we give a lighter weight. When it comes to making a parnasa, making a livelihood, and secular education, we give a heavier weight to it. For example, when it comes to my home, I have the heavier weight. I'm going to beautify my home. But when it comes to the synagogue, I'm going to use the lighter weight. Beautify the synagogue, heavier weights for my home. That's more weighty in my life. The synagogue, that it should be beautiful, a lighter weight. It's not as valuable or as important. So what the Rebbe is suggesting is that we shift our measuring of weights, the way we think, and that we should have a proper weighing of our values. And there's a beautiful story that's told of a rabbi who came to visit one of his congregants, and one of the child, I don't know what age, was doing something desecrating Shabbos, and just his natural, "Oi, Shabbos!" He responded in front of the father to the child, "It's Shabbos." And the father says to the rabbi, he's only a child, he doesn't know the value of Shabbos yet, right? Calm down. A few minutes later, the child is rambunctious and is playing and goes into one of the drawers and takes out some valuable piece of decor. And the father turns around, "Wait, what are you doing?" And runs over and taking it away, maybe the child. So the rabbi turns to him and says, "My dear sir, What are you getting so upset at your child? It's only a valuable piece. He doesn't know that. He doesn't know that it's valuable. What are you getting so excited about? What is this story telling us? To this father, what was valuable? What did he weigh importantly? Not Shabbos for his child. Because Shabbos wasn't important for him, as was the material thing in his life. That he got a little upset about, because it might break this precious item. To him, wasn't precious to the child. Not Shabbos, not the item. It was all a reflection of the father. Because what's weighty for him? What's his values? Shabbos. I mean, it's important, but this valuable piece of my home is more important. That he gets excited about. Tell a story about Rabbi Meir Shapiro, who is the father of the Daf HaYomi, who's the one who started the famous Chachmei Lublin Yeshiva in Poland. There was a donor that said to him, Rabbi, this year I'm not going to be able to give you the donation that I'm regularly give you. For this year, business is down. So he says, you know what? Don't even bother giving it next year either, when business is better. And he explained to him, he says, if business is down and money to the yeshiva you won't give, but your lifestyle will continue, then that's the problem. If your business went down and because of that your lifestyle went down and now you're not able to give, that's one thing. But if you're not giving and your lifestyle is being maintained, that's the improper weights, improper values, then don't bother giving next year either. Man took it to heart, and of course, he understood what true values are. So what the Rebbe is suggesting over here, that the weights of two weights, a proper and an improper one, is where you're putting those weights, where you're putting the values in your life. That becomes the issue. What is your priorities in life? And Rebbe continues with this notion. The godly soul comes along and tells the Jew, listen, you ought to know. Always remember, never forget that you are a child of the King of all kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. He were given for which you never had to work for. You inherited it. A second. As the son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or a daughter of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. By that reason alone, wherever you find yourself and whatever you may be doing, you must conduct yourself as befits a child of the king. This knowledge will not let him do anything unworthy of the king, and certainly not from using the abilities of the king, that the king gave to him, to do something that is against his will. Common sense alone demands this, without any need for hours of profound reflection to arrive at the decision to behave this way. On the other hand, when it comes to material interests of the animal soul, everyone recognizes, even those who value physical matters, that the body is only valuable insofar as it is a living body, and the body is alive not by its own power. It is only because it has something that sustains it, that it can move about, that it has intelligence, that it can think about what it ought to do and what he ought not to do. Inasmuch as this is so, thinking about the body, taking it into account and responding to its demands must only be to the extent that it benefits that which sustains the body. Once a person has accounted for their bodily needs by eating, drinking, and sleeping at the appropriate times, there's no longer any need to think about the body, since it has nothing more than a tool. Rather, he needs to think about the thing that sustains the body, and that is the soul. So ultimately, it comes down to a great duality of life, body and soul. Deciding which should get the priority ultimately is really a no-brainer. If the soul keeps the body alive, and it's not the other way around, shouldn't the soul get precedence? But instead, what do we have? We have an opposite situation. What is the opposite situation that even when he knows that people with lesser means than him are perfectly happy, he has every justification for why he needs more. The main one being, I want it. So regardless of whether or not it makes any sense, he wants 200. And if he has 200, he wants 400. Nothing will deter him from doing whatever he can get, that he can, to get more. The same is true even with regard to superficial matters. For example, the children's education facility. When it comes to secular studies, you can find one person who made $250,000, another $1 million, $1.5 million, to $1 million. Even if they're managed to allow a little religious studies, since secular studies are the main thing, you can find a big donor. However, when it comes to the school building needing to learn religious studies in pure, holy environment, even an $18 high donation is considered respectable. Oops, sorry. It's considered respectable, a respectable sum. And how much more so? 2 times chai, twice chai. Anything more than that is outlandish. He recalls how his grandfather told him about the cheder he used to learn in, and that the teacher's pay was so many kopecks a month, and the schoolhouse itself was only this many inches tall. And so there is no need for any large buildings, beautiful halls, and certainly there's no need for anything they weren't interested in 3 generations ago. This then is the difference between one weight and another weight. It's when there is one weight attitude for material needs, and whatever there isn't enough, and that nothing is too difficult to get more of. However, for spiritual needs, for matters of pure holiness, there is a different measure approach. It's possible to make do with whatever your grandfather, great-grandfather had so many generations ago. Ooh, that is very strong over here. Very powerful, right? So in truth, what we are supposed to have is different weights, different values in life, because not everything is equally important, but the way we skewed it is totally wrong. So Rebbe continues, and he says, whenever it comes to the needs in the morning, and after he studies some Torah, then he can forget about the soul, forget about prayer and study, and then concern himself with only the body and its needs. Thus he develops a perverse one weight and another weight, in that he is immersed in bodily matters for the entire day. With regard to his soul's needs, even for those few hours that he dedicates to affairs of the soul, he is distracted by all of the things he needs to do for the. This is a kind of double measure that the Torah forbids. The body is constant, while the soul is only for special occasions, during prayer. And even then, with distractions, thoughts, the Torah study, and mitzvah observance. So that is the negative way of the wrong weights. The Rebbe now says the notion of double measure can exist in a holy form. We can have it and the opposite way. After all, in truth, one should relate differently towards the soul's needs than towards the body's needs. It is a double measure that the Torah permits. A person ought to show preference and preeminence to the needs of the soul over the body's needs, so that the way one approaches spiritual and physical needs is with a holy kind of double measure. With regard to the soul, since must receive continuous attention without interruption. However, with regard to the body, since it is not eternal and it exists only on account of the soul that animates it, then for all of the concerns himself, all that he concerns himself with the body is connected to it and works to benefit it. He does so with interruptions. After eating, drinking, and sleeping, he turns his attention away from it and occupies himself only with those things that give the body life, the affairs of the soul. So, for example, we're learning right now, right? So the perfect example over here is how many of us shut off our don't answer the phone for something else when we're learning. That might be other affairs that are not of a soul nature. Now, there might be other soul nature affairs that we have when we answer the phone, and we might have other responsibilities. But I know when I learn, I try to always remember to shut off my phone, so that way I can focus. Now, when I'm eating, can I disrupt my eating in order to do something of a spiritual nature? Yeah. So it's the flip side of what we naturally would be doing, is what the Rebbe says. Yeah, we should have the holy different weights, what we value in our lives. And our entire value system presupposes what will then become our engagement in doing things that are wrong. So in order to make sure that we don't go down a slippery slope and then deal with doubt with God and belief in God, which is a mullik, that's the consequence here, right? We need to have the proper value system, the proper weights, and what is necessary over here. So let's summarize for a moment. Let's summarize. We have a godly soul that's integrated in the body. The godly soul is primary. How so? Because it's what gives life to the body. The body's a piece of meat. With that, right? It's the soul. So the needs of the body, therefore, they're mundane, they're temporary, they're limited, they're fleeting. The godly souls, its needs are lasting, they're limitless and sublime. So it's illogical to spend our lives feeding something that's transient, that is only a means to an end, letting it distract us, letting it being the primary thing in our lives. Instead, we need to devote ourselves to those things that are truly lasting, which are the soulful things in our lives. And we can even allow the material things to be interrupted by soulful things. But we shouldn't the other way around. I'll give you an example for me. Because for me, material and spiritual it's, for most people, there's a big distinction. In my life, they're not such a big distinction. So I'm learning with my son. We learn every week. I get a call from someone who's ready to give me a donation. And I know that's what the call's about. And I want to go answer it. And I said, no, I'm not answering. I'm learning now. The reason I'm learning on the phone with my son, so I can't shut off the phone. He's in California. I'm learning on the phone with him. I can't shut off my phone. So in the middle of our learning, I'm getting a phone call. Someone wants to give me a couple $1,000 donation. No. I'm not going to answer it. I really wanted to answer it on, my animal soul wanted to answer. I said, I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to answer. I can always call back the person and get the donation later. If I really believe in God, that donation is coming and it's meant for me, I'll get it. If I really believe. But right now I'm learning. I'm going to interrupt that for, and the money's not for me. The money's for for Chabad. And we need the money. So we need, so, for me, it'd be very easy to because it's a material thing, but it's a material thing for Chabad, and it's it's a lifeline that gives that we can do the work and da 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 da. That's my Yetzer. That's for me my Yetzer Hara. Everybody has their Yetzer Hara. What's the materialism in their life, right? For me, and Baruch Hashem, I was able to withstand it. And by the way, afterwards, I listened to the message. They gave the donation without me even having to. We have to trust. So, so what is our problem in how we are valuing our value system? So what we need to take hold of in the month of Elul, what is the most important thing that we give value to? Is it the mitzvah? Is it the study of Torah? Is it what Hashem wants from me? And those are the things. All of the other things serve those particular values, because those are divine values, those are eternal values. They are the true values that give us life. And we know that because we experience it when we learn together. We experience it when we do the right thing that Hashem needs from us, that when we don't give in to what is temporal, what is an immediate gratification. And this is the deeper meaning of how to deal with it. So where earlier we learned about the problem and the conclusion, or the problem and the consequence. Here, what do we learn? Chassidus teaches us the answer. How are we going to deal with this? We're going to have the proper heavy weight for the things that are eternal and truly important from a godly perspective, and lesser weight. Not that there isn't, and we're not putting any weight on the other things. It's a lesser weight. It only serves the higher one. When we do that, then we will live a true, amazing life. Any questions? Any comments? All right, folks.
I have a question.
Yes, Andrew.
If this is the worst sin, measures and balances, which is lack of faith in God, and in today's and it's correlative to a Malach who doesn't have is not going to be here for the Mashiach. Is that a sin that nobody can come back from if you've cheated in?
Oh, that's what the answer we gave is. You got to change your values. That's the answer. Is it's the question of the value system that we have. What's important to us? Making $1, right? So then, I'm not going to study. I don't have time for Torah. I'm busy making $1, right? I don't have time for davening properly because I got to go make $1. So the dollar is more. It's not that you don't daven. It's not that you don't learn, but those things I can interrupt for the $1. But I'm not going to interrupt the $1 for Torah study. Middle of the day, I'm going to learn Torah when I'm a professional that makes $300 an hour, $500 an hour. I'm going to interrupt now? I lost. I'm going to study in the middle of the day like that? Right? So it's what you give weight to. That's the answer. So it's about changing your values. Then we don't have to deal with the whole first part of the lesson. Because what you're making is primary in your life is your soul, your connection, and your soul means the Torah mitzvahs, of course. It makes sense now. All right, folks. Wishing a good tavach. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you on
Thank
Tanya.
you.
Be well. All the best. Bye-bye.
And to
Thank
you.
you.